Ooh, what this second video? Okay, all right. Put the knives down. Put the knives down. Just Jesus. Okay. I actually promised I'd make this one video. Partially because Tom wanted me on to serve as a partner when going over this new thing, and I wasn't gonna be narrator because he found it with the voice. Saw the video. Yeah, guy's got a great voice. But Tom wanted me to come on as a partner, but I couldn't because I had to work, and I said I'd make a secondary video to this real quick, but I figured I'd go ahead and just kind of read it and kind of make a mirrored video to the one that Tom posted, kind of giving my so it's again more Mensis Molebug. Mensis, yeah, Mensis Molebug. An open letter to open-minded progressives, and specifically they were looking at chapter 2, which was more historical anomalies. And one of the things that I see our good friend Moldbug doing in chapter 2 is he tries to answer a couple of questions. By the way, I read chapter 1, and I kind of went through it and just kind of get the setup into where all this is leading from. And, just kind of sitting there reading through chapter 1, my professional paranoid sensibilities were flaring up, and in a way it also sounds like this was like an open letter to not progressives, or in the cases the letter refers to them as conservatives. It's just, when you've been at war with the collectivists this long, and you serve in that capacity, you start to kind of develop that sense of paranoia. But the real question we must ask ourselves is it really paranoia when they're out to get you? Alright, well, I can't really promise, a full accurate reading as it is, because I kind of read through this myself and just kind of, I didn't really stop to make the video. I'm not going to sit here and read the entire thing out loud. There's another video with someone who's reading that one, and I'll link that one down here. But just on the surface, reading over the letter, and it just from the way it looks, it reads like our good friend Curvis Yarvin, just Molebug, is planting the seeds of doubt to get the progressives to really look at their mindset and think critically of it. And the interesting thing about this is I can see what exactly it is he's trying to do. But anyway, I digress. Chapter 2. He wanted to look at a couple of the questions, and let me see if I can find it. There is the three anomalies. Hang on, I need to go back and look those up real quick at the end here. Yeah, chapter 1 kind of starts off as a whole, if you as a progressive believe that your ideology is whole and pure and true, and everyone who doesn't hold the same one is, evil and corrupt, and you think of it as a virus, he urges you to think of your own ideology. Every ideology is a virus, it's not always black and white. If one side's right, the other side must be wrong. But in the same vein, if your side is wrong, which a progressive will always think that, that they're never wrong. But if they are, then the other side, it has to be right. But then there's also the other cases. What if both are equally right? What if both have a fair point when it comes to a point? And then also in the same vein, if there is the chance that both can be right about something, what if both can also be wrong about something? But I digress. And one of the things is that he really kind of takes a look at the mindset and says, okay, well, if you truly believe that everything, and I think the prevailing theory that um, that he presents to the progressive in question is that, people who want you know peace and freedom for everybody is all well and good, and that the evil conservatives are this predatory life form, that preys on the weak and everything, is bad. But then when you look at the progressive mindset, you have to ask yourself these questions, and let me see if I can find one. First one, the three anomalies, he calls them. Fucking A. I believe the first he said was, the first question we ask the progressive is, what's up with the third world? Why is it every time every time the progressive ideology has tried to intervene in the third world, tried to civilize it, tried to bring it into the light of everything that is good and just, why is it still such a mess? And then the other one is nationalism. What is nationalism, and is it good or bad? And then there is the third one. Why are Nazis considered to be so much worse than the other comparably murderous groups, which is alluding directly to Stalinist Soviet Russia. Comrade. And chapter 2, he really gets down into it and addresses the anomalies in question. One passage right here. So our three anomalies have three things in common. One, progressives have explanations for all of them, but these explanations seem less than usually compelling. Two, these strained explanations are generally shared not just by progressives, but also by their enemies, the conservatives. And three, there is a single anti-progressive hypothesis, which is obviously on its face wrong, or at least incomplete, but can be explained in terms that do not require a gentleman to hurl his sauteur restaurant at his dinner companions, and at least seems to explain it all quite nicely and with plenty of headroom left over. And he goes on to talk about the international community. And when he's talking about that, I think it's he's talking about, the dominant forces in the international community that we see on a regular basis, and by which, I'm sure we've all heard about, the summit of world leaders, the G20s, and all that fun stuff. I think that's what he's talking about when it comes to the international community. You know, G20, G7, all that fuss. I don't even know what the fucking G stands for. But apparently, it's like the world leaders of summits and whatnot. Um, but to go into it, the first anomaly we talk about is what happens to the third world, by which we're talking about then and there. And one of the things that it really brings up is the idea of independence. And it makes this case that the nations that are liberated by the wonderful, wonderful progressive values and ideology are, free, independent, democratic nations that can stand on their own. And then it looks in a little deeper into them, and it notices a funny little trend in the third world. That trend being is that these so-called bastions of civilization that were lifted out of the tribalist barbaric states that they were, they were found in. When you look at them closely and personal, they're weirdly reliant on their so-called liberators. It talks a great deal about foreign aid money being transferred to these so-called independent and free democratic states. And he shows the interesting case of this one country, Somaliland or something like that one. This African country that is not recognized by any of the leading powers of the international community. That is the G20, G7 summit people. It's not recognized as a legitimate country. It has no capability to receive any sort of foreign aid or talk to the world banks or whatnot. And because of this, it has largely had to become self-sufficient. And in that way, it has achieved independence. That is, it is not dependent on anybody for anything. It can largely take care of itself. Which I find this to be an interesting viewpoint, in that when you look at the third world, what do you really see? Do you see nations that have largely shaped their own destiny and are not dependent on anybody to prop them up, to speak? Or are you looking at, and this is where it becomes an anomaly, and you start to see progressives melting down. Are they so heavily dependent on foreign aid and free handouts from their masters? Sorry, Freudian slip there. They're liberators. You see where I'm going with this? But but they're dependent on that to keep them propped up. And he calls them a Muppet state, reference to Jim Henderson's The Muppets. It's uh, not quite a puppet, but more of a it's supported by both. You have the marionette strings which hold it up, and then you have the hand that underneath it that supports it. And it's kind of this weird hybrid thing. Like case in point, when you look at the Muppets, they don't really kind of have that overhead marionette string that you would see of a puppet. What you do have is you have the typical you know hand up the posterior flap in the mouth, but then you've also got um, the hands and limbs are more supported by sticks, and maybe you've seen this as you've gotten older, and you come to realize exactly what these puppets are. And some of them are full body costumes. When you look at it as well. But it's an interesting thing when you look into it there. But yeah, you know, it's an interesting thing when you really look onto it. It's like, are they really free and independent, or are they dependent on somebody to prop them up? And this is probably where the progressives would start frothing at the mouth and screaming about colonialism, and basically, you got the people screaming about about how they had their resources. When we're talking about places like Africa, um, the progressives will start screaming about how the colonizers went in there, stole the resources that would have otherwise made these nations great, and siphon them out to line their own pockets with. In a way, they have a point, but here's the catch. Has anything really changed, even though we've gone from colonizing to liberating these places? Has that really changed? Have these places really been liberated from their masters and made free and independent states? I think that's really what Mulbach's trying to really dive into here, is to really kind of look at do this. It's it's the same. It's the same actions, just with a fresh coat of paint on it to make it look different, nicer. Yeah. Let me see. The second one here. Okay, nationalism. As Mulbach says here, nationalist regimes of movements are good when they're doing God's work. That is, their goal is to become nice multilateral members of the international community. Nationalist regimes and movements are bad when they defy international. Okay, all right. Yeah. The question is, like, what is really nationalism? Like, when you look at it, it's basically supporting the nation as opposed to everybody else. So, when we think of nationalism, recent terms, America First is a good example there. Like that's we want American interests to be first and foremost in any trade agreement we make, in any sort of deal we make with anybody who is with any nation or people who are not American. We want the better side of the deal, or at least not get screwed so hard that we'd be subservient. And when it comes to the defense of America, her people come first. You know, Americans come first in everything, and I think that's kind of what a big deal of what we're talking about in some cases. France for the French, England for the English, Germany for the Germans, Canada for the Canadians, um, Iraq for the Iraqi, Afghanistan for the Afghans, Saudi Arabia for the Saudis, China for the Chinese, Japan for the Japanese. Why not America for the Americans? Why not? Why should Americans take backseat to a bunch of people in another country? I kind of read through this, and Mulbug kind of really talks more about like the unification of Italy, and just talking about how there was a city in Italy that it was a real fucking hellhole, but in the traveler's logs, it was made out to be like a really beautiful thing, and then the Italian unification happened, and then the whole thing just fell apart. I'm not sure how it really plays into what nationalism is. If anything, it seems kind of like a long run-on thing get into. The point it's making is that I honestly don't know. Just looking at it, I don't really know. But towards the end, and this is interesting, and if we look at the citizens of said great powers, because the Italian unification didn't necessarily happen to any real Italians. It was backed by the greater powers, that is to say, France, British, places like that. If we look at the citizens of said great powers, principally, of course, Great Britain, who gave us Greek independence, we see the same type of people who were behind the Mazzani, Shirts, and all the way down in today's international community. Liberals, radicals, thinkers, and artists, progressives. Lord Byron is, of course, the archetype. Again, these are the best and nicest people in the world, now or then. So why in the world do they always seem to turn up in the same breath as phrases like long and bloody struggle? And so the question of the anomaly of nationalism apparently has the same problems as the first anomaly. What happened to the third world? It was devoured by predatory, cynical, bogus nationalism. Why would educated, cosmopolitan, and civilized thinkers support predatory, cynical, bogus nationalism? And again, we hit the wall. The point I think he's trying to get across is that is that the people that are historically progressive, who think the same way as a progressive would think, they always seem to pop up in the most bloody revolutions supporting the enemy that don't really seem like they support good, clean, progressive practices. It always seems like there's a hidden agenda to um, the supposed civilized individual. And then he goes on to talk about like the issue with Nazi Germany and why is it so demonized in today's age. You can't even really say Nazi without raising the hackles of everybody um, within 20 miles of you, which is a shame because there's really a lot to unpack there and really kind of understand fascism. Uh, Kind of really get into it, really pick it apart and understand more of it. But you can't do that. You can't sit down and have a serious conversation about fascism without raising somebody's hackles and getting somebody all uppity and defensive, especially the progressives. Oh, dear, dear Lord. Like, if I wanted to sit down and really discuss, um, how fascism benefited Germany at the time in the short run, because again, it really did. Like following World War One, Germany was in a very very bad place, and thanks to fascism, um, it got it got better. Like, this is the one thing people don't really understand as soon as you invoke the name Adolf Hitler. As soon as that name gets invoked, people start frothing at the mouths and screaming about bashafash, punzanazi, and all the good stuff. And this is actually something I learned very early on in life. It was honestly kind of mind-blowing at the time because I didn't really think of it that way. I bought into the whole frothing at the mouth thing at the thing of Nazis too. But when I was younger, I lived I lived in suburbia, and I grew up. I had friends about my age there, and we carpooled. And one of my friend's dads worked as a transmission mechanic um, at one of the dealerships, and he would always take us to school first thing in the morning because it was on his way to work, and it saved gas for everybody. But he's the one who really got me thinking. Like, when I talked about World War II, and how bad Hitler was and how great the Allies were, he actually would talk to us on the drive there, and he said, "Well, no, it's like Hitler wasn't this horrible demon person. He was no saint for sure," he said, "but he also did a lot of good." And I stopped for a minute because it didn't really register for me. It's like Hitler and good for Germany in the same sentence was computing. But instead of, today's day and age where, you know, like this was back before fucking the whole progressive ideology got so fucking bad that again, you can't even speak Nazi without 500 people all frothing at the mouth and looking for something to punch. When he said that, I didn't understand. And because of the way I had been raised, if you don't understand something, ask questions. Yeah, revolutionary concept, I know. But I didn't understand, and so I asked him, how so? And then he goes on to explain what the state of Germany was following World War One, and just how fucking miserable it was for the people living in Germany at the time. You know. And then Hitler's rise to power, definitely through some shady, underhanded means. You know, I've since looked into it, and I understand more about, you know, how the brown shirts came to be, and all the crazy stuff that's going on in there, and all of it was definitely a fucking one huge psyop to basically get the German people to trust in Hitler. You know, fucking communists and the brown shirts fighting in the streets and whatnot, and you know, Germany's economically bad. People are out of work, like fucking great. Like the Great Depression was hitting everywhere, and in the United States it was also very bad as well. But at the same time, you know, Germany was also suffering under the same thing. And then out comes Hitler, this very charismatic speaking individual. Like seriously, if you watch some of the speeches he does in like the old black and white films, he's very animated, very vocal, and the people are just cheering wildly. Because what he's doing is he's taking advantage of a situation he created, as well as what the fallout of World War I created, to take power. And he is promising the German people safety. He is promising them a return to economic growth. He's basically coming out and saying, I have the answer to fix all your woes and problems, so long as you elect me, you know, Supreme Chancellor of Germany. And, you know, the German people, scared for their own lives because they were literally caught in what was effectively a fucking gang war. Like a giant gang war between the communists and the brown shirts. You know, that's how Hitler got into power. And the interesting thing is that he actually delivered. Believe it or not, he got Germany out of the shithole that it was in, and it returned to being not just returned, like no, Hitler took it further. Like he catapulted Germany into a new age. Like Germany was back and better than ever under Hitler. And this is where my friend's father said, you know, this is where it happened, and why, you know, he's reviled as he is after this. And that's when he told me the phrase that I still understand. It was like the first time I heard it, and I understood the significance of it. Power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. And that's what Hitler had in the end, was absolute power. And this is where, when we see Hitler later in his life, especially after he kicks off the war and everything, is that he becomes incredibly paranoid, thinks everybody's out to get him, and starts making all kinds of wild decisions, not listening and taking, you know, basically keeping his own counsel, not trusting anybody to do anything. And it's because of this that, you know, he provoked the rest of the world. And because he didn't, you know, he kept his own counsel as the war dragged on, that's really what defeated him in the end, was his own hubris. If he had, you know, kept going the way he was and didn't allow himself to be corrupted by absolute power, we would probably be living in a very different world right now. And that's the kind of thing that, it was kind of an eye-opening experience for me. And I had to take a really deeper look into, um, how something like Nazi Germany really came into being, and understanding, how they got there. And it changed my perception a little bit. Um, got me to, to really dig into and understand. Now, it hasn't really changed my mind in terms of, what I think. Nazi Germany, the the Third Reich definitely needed to go down as far as I'm concerned. But I think one of the things that even, Mobug is kind of tutting his finger and we've waggling it at even people like me is that um, we had been sold a lie on that as well, and that the international community um, basically saw fascist Germany as a competing predator. You know, Again, I can already see the progressive, you know, kicking, screaming, wailing their hands and going, "No, no, no! That's not it at all. That's not how things went." But at the same time, they don't really have an answer to kind of counteract that. And at least, I can look at it and go, "Huh, you got kind of a point there." And that's really a lot of what he does here as well. And he basically compares Hitler to people like Mussolini and Stalin. And he's like sitting there. He's like, what are people like FDR and Churchill doing in bed with Stalin? Because you have to remember that we we basically used the Soviets against Germany. We kind of allied with them on that side as well. And it's interesting as Mulbug here talks more about Mussolini than he does Hitler. And he's basically telling us about how Mussolini started off as a socialist and then became a fascist later on. And we all know that Benito Mussolini is the true creator of fascism. And one of the things he says is that for a reactionary, fascism is more or less a short course in what not to do. And this is his perception of it. It was a reactionary movement that combined the worst ideas of the ancient regime and the worst policies of the Democrats and the worst tyrannies of the Bolsheviks. And what was the result? It's every bit as vanished as the Bourboni. And even a lifetime later, our emotional responses to fascism and Nazism make these concepts difficult to handle. One way to step away from the associations is to look not at the Third Reich, but at the Second, and the strange regime of Kaiser Bill and the war he made. And he goes on to talk more about neo-militarism and about how in high society you were judged based on what your officer rank was. And goes on to talk more about World War I in particular and what a mess that was. Now, World War One, as we know, was kicked off when a suburban 19-year-old assassinated Archduke Ferdinand of Austria. That was that was the flashpoint that kicked off the whole damn thing. But why it got so out of hand was that a whole bunch of nations basically made secret pacts with each other. And one of the things that we really, when you look at it, at least from Germany's perspective, the way the Moldbug paints it, Germany saw France, Britain, and Russia um, basically all allying with each other specifically to cut off Germany and effectively choke it to death. So when the Austria-Serbia thing kicked off, it basically triggered all of these pacts at once, and then people, different countries started lashing out at other countries and triggering all kinds of different pacts. So it's like Austria and Serbia start to go to war. They trigger their secret pacts they made with the surrounding countries. Those countries go to war. They get punched in the face by each other, which triggers other pacts, and so on and so forth. And then nobody knows who's really a friend, who's really a foe. Fuck. Fuck, I'm dry. But nobody really knows who's friend and foe, so everybody starts lashing out at everybody else, and that's basically World War I in a nutshell. It's just things eventually settled out, but it was a giant tangle of secret pacts that nobody else was aware of, and then two tiny little nations in the middle of nowhere kick off this huge kerfluffle of the war to end all wars, which is completely missed, especially in this particular chapter. But I digress. This is looking more at it from Germany's perspective. Germany saw the whole thing kicking off, and then because of the fact that its high society consisted of militant officers who basically saw the whole thing, panicked, and decided that while they were at the height of their power, they were going to lash out against France, the UK, and Russia, and basically kind of a movement to take down what it saw as the aggressors. Which in turn prompted those three nations to look at Germany and go, well, this is clearly an aggressor lashing out. We need to stop them. And that's what they sold the war on, was that. Which is interesting. So really, it's a panicked, paranoid nation that's afraid of being stomped out, rightfully fighting for what it thinks is its survival, which in turn provokes retaliation from the other countries, which is thinking that they're fighting for their own survival. And everybody demonizes the other side. Otherwise, how do you get the two sides to fight? But nobody really stops to think. So, again, maybe just because it's late and I'm tired. It's like 5 in the morning when I'm doing this. I can't really wrap my head around what all this is really looking to achieve. Maybe as I read more of this, I'll understand a bit more. But in the same vein, it looks at some of these anomalies that a progressive doesn't really look too closely at, because it affects the faith in their ideology, in things they can't really accept. And it's trying to nudge them a little bit into thinking more critically. It's not openly challenging them and calling them fucking retards, like, like most quote unquote debates do today. It's trying to gently introduce a little bit of doubt and get them thinking, which I'm not entirely certain will work, just because the intentions behind the collectivist mindset are that you don't have to think. You're told what to believe, and you don't have to think about it. Because thinking is hard. I mean, it's definitely hard for me because it's like fucking almost 5 a.m. and I'm tired. I need to get some fucking sleep. But, thinking for yourself is hard for them. So I'm not really sure where he's going with this, but I think it's worth more of a read, and maybe I'll read more into it, and when I'm more awake, and I'm doing this whole thing with Tom again. But yeah, okay, I think I'm gonna go ahead and wrap this video up because I'm getting tired. I'm losing my train of thought. But so far it does introduce these things that a progressive doesn't really think about, and it's trying to gently nudge them into thinking openly and critically. And honestly, it's kind of curious what Mulbug would have to say about my way of thinking. Um, what kind of doubts would he try to introduce to me to get me to think? And I kind of love this stuff. I love these little puzzles. I don't know. I think it's just maybe I like the mystery. I like the puzzle. Okay, well, I think that's all I've got to say on this subject. I'm gonna do things now. Maybe I'll be showing up when they do chapter 3. I had to work when they did this, which is why I didn't show up there. But I would have loved to have actually been there and really talk more about this. But this is nice too, being able to freely just ramble on about this and kind of think my way through it.